That was pretty nice. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the broadcast, everybody. Um, the usual challenge is on the table, in that I am making a claim that all gods are imaginary, and you're invited to come into the panel and prove me wrong. Don't ask me questions. Just come in and prove me wrong. That's all I ask of you. Hey, Wild Eden, good to see you. What I was thinking of doing, because it's kind of boring to wait and wait and wait for someone to come in, for people to come into the chat room. So, I have a video lined up that we are going to watch. It's about 45 minutes. And it's entitled The Necessity of Atheism. Now, it is not a modern document. It was written in approximately 1811, 1812, 1813, somewhere around there, by a name that everybody's familiar with, and that's Percy Bysshe Shelley. British Humanist Association, or Humanists UK, invited someone to talk on the work, and I'm going to share that with you right now. But feel free to hop on anytime. We can always stop the video and or stop it and carry on from where we left off. Or what am I doing here with the graphic? Oh, there we go. Okay, I think hold on a sec. I'm being kind of OCD here. Got to get out of the picture. All right, so if I do that and I do that, that's so much better. Okay, let's rock.
Welcome to the inaugural Shelley lecture of the British Humanist Association. My name is Andrew Coxon. I'm the Chief Executive of the British Humanist Association. We have a calendar of events through the year. The Darwin lecture is held every February on a subject of relevance to Darwin himself, to his work, or to more recent developments in natural science. We have a Voltaire lecture every year on some aspect of philosophy or of humanism related to Voltaire. And we have a Holyoake lecture every year in Manchester. Holyoake is less well known than the other two. He was a founder not only of the secularist movement in the 19th century, but also of the cooperative movement, and it's held in Manchester for that reason. This year we're adding the Shelley lecture, and it's our intention that the lecture should be given every year on some subject relevant not necessarily directly to Shelley, but to literary culture, perhaps to history, other aspects of Shelley's life or what he stands for as they relate to humanism. And we're really pleased to be able to fill that sort of gap in our annual lecture series and have some wider representation of different themes and topics that are of interest to humanists. Well, we're having the Shelley lecture, the first Shelley lecture this year, because it's the 200th anniversary of that poet being sent down, expelled from this university for putting his pamphlet about the place that suggested there was no proof for a God. We'll hear more about that from our lecturer this evening. But first I'll introduce our chair, who has also put about books suggesting even more so, that there might not be a God, and who's very well known to all of you, Professor Richard Dawkins.
There's a very charming book called The Silent Traveller in Oxford by Chiang Yi, Chinese author, who wrote a number of books looking at the world through Chinese eyes. And the Silent Traveller in Oxford is a lovely book with beautiful Chinese-style pictures of Oxford. And one of them is a picture of what he labels a pair of freshmen sort of bounding up the stairs, a staircase in their college. A very Chinese picture of these Oxford freshmen. And Chiang Yi says, I could tell they were freshmen because I overheard one of them saying to the other, do you read much Shelley? Well, times have changed. Not that people don't read Shelley anymore, but that it's unlikely that you would identify a freshman by his habit of reading Shelley. Times have changed in another way. As Andrew intimated, one doesn't actually get sent down from Oxford nowadays for atheism. And as he said, it is the 200th anniversary this month of Shelley's being sent down for his pamphlet on the necessity of atheism. Anne Rowe is a distinguished historian and biographer. She's now the obituaries and briefings editor of The Economist. She's been on The Economist for quite a long time. Originally she covered American politics, and she's been the books and arts editor, US editor, and as I say, she now edits the obituaries page and writes most of the obituaries herself. She did her first-class history degree at Oxford and a DPhil in medieval history at Oxford. After that, she worked at the BBC World Service. She's written 5 books: Lives, Lies and the Iran-Contra Affair, 1991. She worked up her DPhil thesis into A Fool and His Money, Life in a Partitioned Medieval Town. She's written biographies of Pontius Pilate and of Perkin Warbeck, one of those pretended to be a prince in the Tower. And she's written a biography of Shelley. I'm not sure she calls it a biography, but it's a kind of biography of Shelley. And is this year's chairman of the Keats Shelley Prize. It's a great pleasure to ask Anne Rowe to give the inaugural Shelley lecture, which appropriately enough is on Shelley.
Thank you very much, Richard. Can everyone hear me? Good. And thank you too to the British Humanist Association for inviting me to speak this evening. Had you been in this city 200 years ago, towards the end of February, you might have seen a tall, long-haired, slightly stooped young man race out of University College with a bundle under his arm. If you were one of the university authorities, you might already have been wary of this first-year student. Expensively but untidily dressed, with a proud, wild look, and known as a troublemaker. His name was Percy Bysshe Shelley. He was 18. He was the son of a Sussex landowner, but was already driving his father to distraction with his uncle's horrible ways. He had been a star pupil at Eton, but had already made several attempts on the place with electrical machines and gunpowder. He crossed the High, past the body and strode, he always strode, radiant with determination, towards Munday and Slatter's printing shop and stationers on the corner of the Broad. Mr. Munday had already published some of his poems, and in fact Shelley's father had asked him particularly to indulge his son in his, quote, printing freaks. The shopman's tolerance was about to be most severely tested. Once inside the door, Shelley put his bundle down, took out a handful of his booklets, and scattered them in the window and over the counter. Thus was published The Necessity of Atheism, a teenage tract by one of our greatest and most challenging poets that was seen by very few at the time, read by fewer, perhaps appreciated by none, said the proud author, but which today we've gathered to celebrate. It wasn't Shelley's unaided work. He'd been helped in it by his best friend at Union, Thomas Jefferson Hogg, and together they'd been feverishly plotting it all through the Christmas holidays. But Shelley was in charge of the final form of it, the printing and the distribution, and he knew what he was doing. He had chosen the title of his little tract, as he fondly called it, to cause maximum offence. Atheism was necessary. Necessary for progress, necessary for man's liberation. And it wasn't only necessary, but fated and inevitable, as mankind in history surged towards enlightenment, to give it the weight that it had for Shelley in 1811. Necessity kicks God out of the universe. They can't exist together. And Shelley is harnessing this force for his own purposes, dispersing his explosive material in a way that presages his wonderful lines in the Ode to the West Wind, written 8 years later in 1819. Scatter as from an unextinguished hearth, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. Indeed, his words became ashes very quickly, in about 30 minutes, in fact. A local clergyman spotted the booklets, didn't need to read them for the title was enough, had the whole lot swept up and ordered Mr. Slatter and Mr. Monday to burn them in the back kitchen. The repercussions were dire, as you've heard. Shelley and Hogg were hauled before the Master and Fellows of University College, were plied with questions about the pamphlets and refused to answer. So around this date, in fact on the 25th of March, they were expelled. Shelley had been at Oxford for less than 2 terms. He despised the place for many reasons, not least its intellectual narrowness and its pompous religiosity. He mocked his expulsion as proof of the weakness in his enemies' arguments, since, as he indignantly told his fuming father, quote, no argument was publicly brought forward to disprove our reasoning. But all the same, he was shattered to be thrown out. He became, thanks to his little tract and a liberal, cavalier attitude to marriage, an outcast both from his family and from the wider society. A man whose reputation for immorality cost him both readers and influence. A confirmed rebel against authority of every sort, whether God or man. As a result, he eventually sought exile in Italy in 1818, where he died in a freak sailing accident in 1822. His whole career, as a poet therefore, both in its shape and in its themes, could be said to have unfolded from the appearance of the necessity of atheism, and from its equally swift disappearance. Suppose you'd been there with your 21st century sensibilities unchanged, and suppose you'd bought a copy. It cost 6pence, rather steep for only 14 pages, some of them blank. Or suppose you'd had it thrust urgently in your hand by Shelley, for this was urgent work to him. What would you have thought of it? The answer, I think, is that no reasonable person today would be in the least offended by it. You might say it was too rational. You might find its style galumphingly pompous, especially for an 18-year-old. Shelley does tell William Godwin, though, when he sends him a copy, that he has, quote, compressed it from much prolix reasoning. You might be aware that this young man is a prankster, and he's been writing atheistical letters to clergy and other poor, unsuspecting types for a while, pretending to be a Christian in confusion, saying the most shocking things in a way that looks polite on the surface. But there's no pranksterism about his booklet. It's short, serious, focused, and you can't argue with its clear and reasonable sincerity. The epigram comes from Bacon. The human mind cannot in any way accept as true that which lacks a clear and obvious demonstration. So there's the theme, a very polite request for proof of God's existence, and a passionate plea for truth, for its love of truth that has pushed Shelley to write this. And as he concludes, truth has always been found to promote the best interests of mankind. His arguments are very simple. In essence, they are Locke and Hume's arguments. Why do we believe in anything? Because we're convinced by the evidence of our senses, our own experience, or by the experiences of others. In the case of God, however, our senses don't tell us he exists, nor does our physical experience. Some say the world must have been created, but it's equally reasonable, and in fact easier, says Shelley, to suppose that it has existed for all eternity. The generative power itself, the first cause of life, does indeed seem beyond human understanding. But, says Shelley, to suppose that life is produced by, quote, an eternal, omniscient, almighty being doesn't help. In fact, it makes it even more incomprehensible. As for the testimony of other people, it is required, Shelley says sternly, that it should not be contrary to reason. And since such testimony is bound to be of miracles or other unreasonable things, it just won't do. Though Shelley doesn't mention it here, he writes elsewhere that there's no such thing as a miracle, only an event or an operation of nature that we don't yet understand. When God is subjected to the full glare of reason, he simply doesn't stand up. From this, it is evident, runs the last part of Shelley's argument, that having no proofs from any of the three causes of conviction, the mind cannot believe in the existence of a God. It is also evident that as belief is a passion of the mind, no degree of criminality can be attached to disbelief. Every reflecting mind must allow that there is no proof of the existence of a deity. To this, Shelley adds an unnecessarily cocky flourish, QED. And he signs his work in shouting capitals, through a deficiency of proof, an atheist. Yet apart from these provocations, there's nothing in the Necessity of Atheism that deserves the fire. Shelley simply asks quietly and logically for proof of God's existence, and he appeals to the bishops and heads of the Oxford colleges, to whom he has also sent copies, to answer his arguments, to set him right if he's wrong. Reasonable enough to us, but let's consider how this appeared in 1811. This was, in fact, the first openly atheist pamphlet ever published in England. That's how daring it was. At the time, a routine, unquestioning Anglicanism held sway both in Oxford and in England at large. A man like Shelley's father accepts it absolutely, for it underpins the social order and keeps revolution at bay. Revolution which, of course, has happened only 20 years before and only 20 miles across the Channel. A mere handful of radical thinkers, Tom Paine, William Godwin, for example, object to what, in Shelley's eyes, is an intolerable establishment of religion, a system of eternal punishments and rewards exacted by a tyrannical God who to Shelley is a sort of cross between a Hanoverian oaf like the Prince Regent and his own father. He sends his father a copy of the Necessity of Atheism too. Timothy Shelley scrawls impious on the title page. Shelley knows that truth would never flood into human minds until what he calls the false medium of religion.
To be totally honest, And I mean, like, totally honest, I'm finding this to be rather boring. How about you? Boring, boring, boring. So I'm going to just slide this out the way. And just remember, the room's open. Come on in. Take my challenge. Prove me. Ooh, I've got to change that graphic there. Just give me 1 second. I mean, it's not a graphic, sorry, it's text. It's text. Oops. Can't see, it's too dark. Ah, there we go. So, yeah, that was pretty boring. I lost a whole bunch of people. I lost half my viewing audience because of that lady's boring lecture. But, fear not. If you're still interested in The Necessity of Atheism, which is a work by Percy Bysshe Shelley, I still have something to share with you on it. And where did I put it though? Is the question. Ah, yes, this guy. All right. I'm going to give it another shot, all right? With your kind permission, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give it another shot and see if we can get a better, more exciting. Yes, it's even shorter though. Oh, excuse me, I already had it lined up there. Okay, stand by. Okay. Standing by. And I'm going to switch to this. This over here. Where am I? I'll just stick myself over there. Okay, so here we go. This is a talk given by by Frank Zindler at American Atheist Convention. I better change the nomenclature of the creditor. It's American Atheists actually. And well, I'm gonna just let it run. I'm just gonna let it run, see how exciting it gets. Okay.
Explain the expansion of the universe. Actually, that was not his greatest blunder. In my opinion, his greatest blunder was in a quip he made to George Gamow, the physicist, who was a childhood hero of mine from 6th grade on. He told Gamow that compound interest is the strongest force in the universe. As a physics student in 1955, a high school physics student, I felt instinctively that he was wrong. I felt that more potent than compound interest was the force of ignorance. Unfortunately, I had no opportunity at that point to correct the master and improve his educational status. But my physics teacher, Doc Kaler, who had worked on the atomic project at Los Alamos during the war and had known Einstein personally.
Is this guy going to get to the point?
Doc Kaler managed to get me an invitation to meet Einstein that would take place at the end of the spring semester.
No way. This guy met Einstein?
Unfortunately, I never got a chance to explain to Einstein why and how he was wrong.
Oh, he did meet
Einstein died on April 18th of 1955. And so he died misunderstanding the universe in such an important factor.
Oh. Poor
If I'd had the
Einstein.
opportunity, I would have explained something that he surely must have known, namely that, well, I think he was making a joke on par with God does not play dice with the universe, but anyway, I would have explained that compound interest has meaning only in the context of human civilization. It has no meaning in the context of the strong and weak nuclear binding forces and stuff like that. Well, that being the case, we must ask, what is the most potent force in the universe, in the socio-political universe in which we must live? I've already said that I think that's ignorance. I think it is ignorance in general and willful ignorance in particular. Dictators and priests have to have ignorant audiences, electorates, and congregations in order to successfully parasitize these populations and to rule. For such people, secular education in general and scientific education in particular are correctly seen as their enemies. Just think of the role of Betsy DeVos today. Yeah. Time does not allow a full disclosure of all my evidence, but a single illustrative example should suffice to show the interplay of religion, politics, and ignorance. Consider the existential threat today of global warming. It is willful ignorance driven by unenlightened self-interest that causes right-wing, religiously affiliated politicians to deny reality. If they knew of the principle of enlightened self-interest, trying to arrive at win-win solutions to disputes, to achieve longer-lasting gains in their own interest, they would jump onto the green wagon and strive to solve the problem facing us. Ignorance of science and ignorance of philosophy prevents them from doing that. But hasn't even the Pope, the guy that named himself after me, hasn't the Pope said that global warming is real? Well, yes, he did. However, he will not publicly admit that the driver of global warming is human overpopulation, a population that has surpassed the long-term carrying capacity of this spaceship we call Earth. Catholic dogma still holds that abortion, sterilization, and contraception, all these things that are needed for population control, are sins. As you probably know, strict Catholics have to believe some really incredible things. They have to believe that the goldfish wafers that they have in the Mass are made of God bod. They have to believe that the Mogen David wine that they drink in communion contains heavenly hemoglobin. Not only that, they have to believe that the fertilized egg, a single cell, is a person possessed of a soul. Politicians are elected or driven from office according to the positions they take on such absurdities. The ignorant belief in single-celled persons has led Catholics to a denial of overpopulation as the driver of global warming. It is the same ignorant belief that led to the outlawing of stem cell research during the 8-year Bush presidency. I believe that that ban in medical research led to the 2013 death of my wife, Anne. My wife of 48 years, 2 months, 2 weeks, 2 days, and 6 hours. For you see, there are many similarities in the way that ordinary body cells can be transformed into stem cells, and the way that they can transform into cancers. And so, within the 8 years after Obama allowed resumption of stem cell research, discoveries had been made that would have kept Anne alive had they been known at the beginning of the Obama presidency. And those discoveries could have kept her alive until complete cures were available. So why did Bush, under Catholic pressure, suspend stem cell research? Well, you see, totipotent stem cells are the functional equivalent of zygotes, fertilized eggs. If you're trying to clone people, those stem cells could develop into one or more identical embryos, depending upon how you manipulated them. And you'll see, each one of those stem cells has a soul. If you took stem cells from my adipose tissue, alas, I have several trillion more of those than I really want. If you took those fat cells and de-differentiated them in tissue culture to totipotency, and then flushed those former fat cells down the toilet, you would be guilty of a genocide more heinous than that of Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, and the Holy Roman Inquisition all rolled up together. I first met Madalyn Murray O'Hair, the founder of American Atheists, in the autumn of 1976. I had dedicated my life to her cause and to this organization less than a year later. Right from the beginning, Madalyn showed how atheism, the liberation of the mind, was the most fundamental liberation of all liberation types of movements, be they women's liberation, LGBTQ liberation, or any of the other liberation movements that people here today might subscribe to. All liberation movements are facilitated by the advancement of atheism. All liberation movements are opposed or retarded by the survival of religious beliefs. Beliefs that, without exception, are founded on ignorance. Because atheism and the skeptical mindset of which it is a part motivates us to remove impediments to obtaining knowledge, atheism is the antidote to ignorance. Atheism is a necessity if civilization is to survive.
Yes.
Long before I enlisted in Madalyn Murray O'Hair's War on Ignorance, she dreamed of founding an atheist university, actually an atheological atheist seminary. It would be an institution of higher learning centered around a precious library and archive of books and ephemera that preserve the worldwide heritage of humanism and atheism and free thought.
Yeah.
It would gather up the secular sacred thought relics of those who lived and fought and died before us in the war to liberate the human mind. The Charles E. Stevens American Atheist Library and Archives was intended to be the research home to atheist writers and scholars, writers who would publish leaflets, books, and articles. Both scholarly and popular materials would be produced that would counter the inundation of ignorance gushing forth from the hydrothermal well springs of religious and other atheist organizations and anti-liberty organizations. American Atheist Press, for which I have been the editor since the 1995 abduction and murder of Madalyn and her family, would be the vehicle through which their research and philosophical investigations would be published to the world. To that end, from 1979 onward, I wrote articles for our journal, American Atheist. Collectively, those articles could be used as a textbook for atheist activists to defend their positions and advance the cause of reason. Some years ago, they all were collected into the 4 volumes of my so-called red books, Through Atheist Eyes, Scenes from a World That Won't Reason. Madeleine's university would be an institution of higher learning where all the world's religions would be subjected to critical, logical, legal, historical, and scientific analysis. The scientific philosophy of atheism would be seen to rest on firm foundations. It would be woven into a conciliant system of interlocking and convergent lines of evidence, just like the world of science itself. Graduates would not only be equipped to defend atheism from the attacks of religious and political apologists. As a result of thorough counter-apologetics studies, they would be able aggressively to enlarge the world of science and reason. They could reduce the bounds and bonds of religious ignorance and superstition. Madeleine hoped that her graduates would be able to go out into the public and liberate believers from the thought chains that were keeping them in the army of ignorance. They would recruit them into the liberating legions fighting to preserve science, political freedom, and reason. I don't remember her ever doing a mathematical analysis of the feasibility of such a thing, but we can do that here today. What if for every 10 people, I don't know, I think there are 10 people in a complete row. What if for every 10 people here, 2 believers were deconverted in the next year? And this continued on, and those 2 in proportion went on to deconvert to other non-believers, other believers in the next year, and so on, for every 10 of you. What would be the effects then of a 20% deconversion rate? Well, I haven't learned how many people are registered for this conference, but I'm sure it's at least 700. We had that number, I think, a year or 2 ago. In 10 years, the 700 atheists in the audience would have become 4,334 people doing their damnedest to succeed at reality testing. In 20 years, it would have grown to almost 27,000, and in 30 years to 166,000 plus. That actually would be 22,000 more than the number of Jehovah's Witnesses who are going to be going to heaven. I don't know if you're aware, though, there will only be homosexuals, male homosexuals, in heaven, because they have to be men who have not been defiled by women. I'm sure you all know that. So it's hopeless, you're not going to go to heaven. Anyway, well, actually, some of you might, come to think of it. But anyway, that's just starting with this audience. But what if we started with 1 million of the best educated atheists in America today? In 10 years, they would be over 6 million, certainly enough to take hold of the reins of government and leadership in this nation. In 20 years, they would be over 38 million, and in 30 years, they'd be over 237 million, which would be actually coming hard on the heels of the total American population in 2017. Such is the power of compound interest. Compound interest. Maybe Al was right. Could I have been wrong for the first time in my life? Oh, wait, I forgot. I was wrong once before. I thought I'd made a mistake. 8 days ago would have been the 100th birthday of our founder, Madalyn Murray O'Hair. And in 2020, we will mark the 25th anniversary of the abduction and murder of her and her family. And so I wish to turn my closing thoughts back to them. As par excellence practitioners of the art of reality testing, the Murray O'Hairs walked ever in the daily light of the real world. But they were also dreamers. They dreamt of the day when no individual life ever again would be placed in jeopardy by the reality testing failure known as religion. The survival of our species should not be endangered by deluded minds pursuing a cosmic will-o'-the-wisp. No one ever again should be forced to pay taxes to support an invisible kingdom known only on the say-so of its parasitic ambassadors, the clergy. Never again should the world be thrust back into a dark age. They dreamed that the divisiveness and hatred fomented by
I don't know about you, man, but this is
would be
getting
overcome.
boring as hell. Fuck, enough, man. Yeah, I mean, just get in the way. Don't you think that was boring? Were you paying attention? No, I was kind of. Somebody speaking, I hear a drone, a buzz. Neither of these speeches that I specifically chose have been very successful in covering Percy Bysshe Shelley. And I will continue to look for something that covers the actual work, the Necessity of Atheism that he wrote. I have the PDF and I could read it, but I don't want to because there's a lot of Latin in there. Would I read from my book, Bestow? What book? I don't have a book. I mean, I have lots of books. What book are you talking about? I would prefer somebody to come in and prove me wrong on my statement that all gods are imaginary. That's what I would prefer if I had my druthers. But my druthers are not mine. Oh, come on, where are you, playlist? Oh. That's weird, isn't it? I thought you thought I wrote a book? Oh, the book that I was holding up in the... No, it's not my book. It's a book written by Armin Navabi from Atheist Republic. What he does is he asks people to send in a photo with themselves and a piece of Atheist Republic merchandise. Well, I bought the book, and I took the picture and I sent it in, and that became a cover image. But I have read the book. I have actually read the book in a video somewhere. It's on my channel. If you want to hear me read that book, that's there. I don't know if it was the greatest reading because sometimes I guess my throat gets dry and I'm not prepared for it, and it just gets croaky. So, but give it a try. In the comments below, tell me how I could improve, because I really would love to know, get some feedback. Would I write a book myself? Probably not. It's amazing that you asked me would I write a book myself, and as I was thinking, what would I write a book about? And nothing came up. So I guess I wouldn't. I could make up, write some fiction and stuff, but I don't think, is that what you're alluding to? I'm not really qualified to write anything other than fiction, I guess. And blogs. I can write I do have a blog, but I used to have a blog every day, but I kind of just moved over to this. See, I'm lazy. I go live. I don't really have any work to do. There's no editing beforehand and all this kind of stuff. I'll just do it live, and if I screw up, I screw up. There's one for the ages. It's caught. It's captured for eternity. Sidney Winston screwing up again on a live stream. It's kind of become almost like a trope. Okay, I'm going to give 15 minutes. You think 15 minutes is enough? I think so. So I'm going to give 15 minutes to what? Oh, you finished your food. Oh, I gotta go and refeed my doggie. She finished all her breakfast. Isn't she a good doggie? You qualified to write about the Gospel of Mark? All right, I tell you what. I will put here. I'm gonna put the timer on there, and I'm gonna let it run, and I'm gonna play some music while I refill my dog's dish and stuff. And you can come on in and talk to me about it. I'll give you 15 minutes to get your courage together. Okay?
Thank you.